wonders. Today I'm going to talk about my 1970 Chevy C20. Now this is a video I've been wanting to do for the longest time. I've been meaning to do it and haven't had the chance to do it. Been wanting to talk about it. It's been this truck here in particular has been a great truck for me in terms of it being a daily driver. It's also been a tow vehicle for my race car, and it's also been a nice toy to have play with as well in terms of cruising around and enjoying some cruising time with the friends. But before I get into it and what I've particularly done to this truck, I gotta say, a lot of people appreciate this body of truck, and growing up personally, this was my dream truck. Looking at pictures of these in magazines and looking at seeing these on the road, cruising and stuff like that, and I always love the body lines on these. People call these the glamour body because they're very appreciated for their looks, and the actual terms for them, believe it or not, were called the action line, or the second gen. When the CK came out, this was the second generation of the CK. Then you had the first generation CK, and then before that you had the Apache. And when they quit naming the trucks the Apaches, they started calling them the CKs, of course. And, these trucks, I never understood why they call them the action line, to be honest with you. I mean, action packed maybe, but I mean, it is to me. But these trucks, you could get quite a variety of motors came in these trucks. You could get anything from a 250 straight six to a 402 big block they ended up putting in these. And the 402 was actually a decent output for the time, more so than the output that Ford had out at the time in their bump sides. And I had a 67 F100 at one point, and it had a 306 in it with 3 on the tree. I love that truck. You go on my videos and see the vehicles I've owned, and you can look it up. It's in there. I talk about it and how much I appreciated it. But I wanted one of these over anything. And when I finally got it, I bought this down in Memphis, Tennessee, sight unseen. And I drove it home. I drove it home 800 miles. It smoked. It ran like garbage. And a lot of things were wrong with it. I mean, it had wagon wheels on it at the time. It had different bumpers on it. And the front bumper was pinched in, and then the back bumper was a goofy aftermarket one that I didn't like. So I ended up changing those out, and I ended up going with 16.5 wheels because I want a factory, 100% factory correct appearance. It also came with goofy, I want to say they were GMT 400 mirrors that they were just crudely pasted on there, and it was like there was no effort put into it whatsoever. It was all kind of half-assed. You can see in the paint that they painted the wiper arms and stuff. So that stuff right there, I've been slowly fixing along the way, but it's also been getting used too. So you got to kind of make time for things. But overall, it's been a great truck. Like I said, I bought it down south because the floor pans have been replaced in it. It's solid. It's not, it's got little rough spots here and there, but nothing serious. And I wanted a solid truck that I could just kind of get in and drive rather than tear the cab apart and restore for once and change the cab on it, or change the fenders and bed and stuff, which I plan on changing the bed anyways because that bed's been bondoed up so much and still got pinholes in the bed and stuff and the floor, and I don't want to really get into that, so try and find a bed out west or down south eventually. But this truck here, another thing I had to do was fix the exhaust on it because it was so loud coming back and obnoxious. It drove me nuts. And there's no radio in this thing either, so I ended up just putting my phone on the dash with some music on YouTube, so to the best of my ability to listen to it. And you'll see here when I open the hood up here in a minute, you'll see what I mean with how bad things were. I'll get into detail on how bad the engine was and how much I had to tune it up. But I just wanted to give a virtual overlook on it. Then we'll go under the hood here in a second, and then we'll take it for a drive. So under the hood here, and as you can see, it's a basic small block 350. And when we bought this, it smoked like crazy and it ran like garbage. And we got it back. We managed to drive it 800 miles from Memphis, Tennessee. We ended up driving this thing. I ended up bringing this thing right around the corner from Graceland, believe it or not, all the way back up here to the Metro Detroit area, and in Michigan here. And I tell you what, I was amazed it made it back, to be honest, because it was this engine. It's still tired to this day. And it was really tired that weekend, but managed to get it back, and right away I ended up putting new plugs in it, wires, you name it. I did a full tune-up, changed the oil on it. It actually ate a quart of oil about every 200 miles or so. We had to stop and put a quart of oil in it, and come to find out later that fall, we ended up having to change the oil pump out of it because it didn't have no oil pressure. And it ran around for probably a month, because I don't have an oil pressure gauge in there. It ran around for a month with very little to no oil pressure, believe it or not. And it just goes to show how loose this engine is and how tired it is. I mean, it's gotten to the point now where it's actually the reverse effect. It makes so little, power, and it's so loose-ended that it really can't hurt itself at this point unless you completely run it out of oil for, 1,000 miles. But it's always had oil in it. I've always made sure of that, of course. But ended up having to, basic things, belts, and had to end up putting a new master cylinder on it. Ended up putting, a lot of other new things into it. Luckily, it had, it's got some things that have been replaced on it, like the brake lines and stuff like that. But they really half-assed a lot of the things on this. Some of the wiring they butchered. This truck had an aftermarket radio in it, and they ended up going through it, and it didn't look very pretty, I'm sure. They ended up pulling it out before they sold this thing. But either way, it had, typical 50-year-old truck, how many owners it goes through and what they do to it. You expect that kind of stuff. But once again, I was very impressed this thing made it home. So when we did the oil pump on this, we discovered it's a 2-bolt main, which means this is not the original motor out of this truck. And I ended up looking at the pulling the valve cover off, and I ended up looking at the cylinder head number, and sure enough, it does not correspond to the year. It's a 624 cylinder head number, which ran from, I think, 79 to 84. But they're garbage heads in terms of flowing and quality. They're really thin casting, they crack, and they're the most god-awful flowing heads. You ask any guy who knows the small blocks, he'll tell you the same thing. But right then and there, it told me that this whole motor is a swap motor out of something from the early 80s, probably out of a G-body or Caprice, or like an El Camino or something. But it don't make much power. I mean, this motor, when it was new, only made probably 165 horsepower, as they all pretty much did at the time. And it probably makes way less now, being as tired as it is. But I have to say, this little motor here, I call it the little 350 that could for a reason. That's because this motor, since I got it home, has pulled my race car to multiple racing events. And behind this truck, between my race car and the trailer, my open car trailer I had, it was probably a good 5,000 pounds that I was towing, maybe a little less. And then this red enclosed that I have, it's probably closer to 6, because the enclosed weighs more, and I got a heavier race car now too. I had the Miata, and I ended up getting a 944 that I run touring with now, and yeah, but it still pulls it. I was impressed with it. I've been impressed with it, and it ain't a left lane regular, I'll tell you that. It definitely stays in the right lane 99% of the time on the freeway. It'll do 55, 60 tops, but yet at the same time, it's like you gotta be conscious of this motor needing, crying for oil and stuff like that sometimes, and needing a new quart of oil every 200 miles. So, because it's that tired. I ended up putting Restore in it, and I've run seafoam through it and stuff like that. Keep some of the good left in it. But for the most part, this motor needs to be pulled out of here and torn apart and gone through, which is why I've decided, as of this video at least, I am not towing with this truck anymore until I put my new motor in here, which I'll show you in this video. I will be putting a 402 big block in this, believe it or not. I want to keep it factory correct, of course, and the only thing that's going to be different about this 402 in particular is I plan on running a Holley Sniper on it, and I plan on putting a different cam in it, and it should definitely wake it up a little bit. The 402 that I ended up getting, I got it in pieces, and they didn't include a cam with it, so I'm just gonna put a baby little RV cam in, just enough cam to, you know, make it tow well, and you know, but nothing crazy. But yeah, that's the story behind this 350 though. It's it's pretty beat, but believe it or not, it doesn't really smoke or anything except for on startup. But when you drive this thing, you can tell it's tired. I mean, it's got a 410 rear end, which helps too, you know, with the gear reduction. But put a lot of effort into keeping the good in it, and it's time for it to get on out of here. And then when I put the 402 in here, then I'll start towing with it again. But till then, this is it's kind of going to be a roundabout daily driver, or, you know, local hauler for, you know, scrap stuff like that I've been hauling around, firewood, you know, things for the house that I've been working on. But yeah, so that's about it for under here. And here, as you can see, I got the 402 big block sitting in here in my shop. Plan on putting it together and putting it in that truck, and hopefully it'll be a lot more potent. As you can see in here, of course, I got the interior. It is a 4-speed, and it is on the floor, as you can see. It's got vinyl bench seat, of course. It's definitely not the original. I think it's been reupholstered once, but the upholstery is starting to come apart again. I ended up having to tape it. Still, I've got to get a radio for it because I want to actually cut this section of dash out and they sell a patch panel to put in here that brings back the original holes for the original radio, and then I want to get a retro radio to put in there. But till then, I take this and I put it up there. It's actually this is probably louder than the radio I plan on putting in here with the one speaker system, because I'm not going any crazy with it. But as you can see, floors are very solid. It's dirty in here, of course, because it's been sitting for a little bit, but I've been sitting in my driveway here and there. But I gotta redo other things like the dash panel, and you know, I gotta change the sun visors around. I plan on painting this truck gold, so everything interior wise is gonna get painted gold, and then I gotta paint the steering column because I want to have gold with black, you know, trims and stuff. I ended up getting an ashtray for it. It didn't have an ashtray in it when I got it, and I ended up getting one put in there. I use it. Smoke my cigars with it. And another thing I like too is the mirror is attached to the windshield. 72, I believe, is the only year you could get with the mirror on the windshield that was glued here. They used adhesive to put it on the windshield. When I got this truck and brought it home, I ended up driving around for a little bit. It had this goofy aftermarket steering wheel on it that was really small, and I ended up putting, of course, an original looking steering wheel in it. They're not cheap, but I wanted the 110% original feel of driving this thing. Same thing with the shift knob. It had a goofy Hurst T-handle shifter on it. I hate those things. So I ended up getting scoring an original shift knob for the 4-speeds in this thing. I scored it out of the C30 from a buddy of mine. He was kind enough to just give me it. And of course, you got your basic climate controls and stuff in here. No air conditioning. It's just a regular old farm truck, work truck from down south. And as you see, I got my oil gauge here. my oil gauge, new gauges over here, but I actually had an issue leaking with the oil pressure line, and I ended up burning it up a little bit on the tip there and closing it off, because these gauges actually ended up leaking on me. At least the pressure gauge did. The other two gauges work, so I know what my temperatures are and my voltages, but oil pressure, I actually want to put my oil pressure back up to the light like it was originally. So, you know, I mean, these old motors, they're, you know, so loose-ended that they're not like the LS motors and stuff where you gotta oil pressure is more of a essential thing. I mean, they're a little more forgiving, these old engines are, but other than that, there's not a whole lot left to this interior. I mean, it's, you know, not a whole lot left to explain. I gotta put a dome light, you know, little creature things here and there, but it's coming along. So we're gonna come back here to the trailer hitch receiver. As you can see, I put a trailer hitch on it. That was one of the things I put on top of the bumper as well. I ended up removing the spare tire. It actually had the original spare tire, which is currently being used to hold to weigh the back of my S10 down, but I do still got it. It's an old split wheel, and I didn't want to deal with it, so I actually ended up scoring these 16.5s, as I previously mentioned, and it came with 5 of them, so I ended up using one as a spare wheel. And that's the original wheel on it, or tire on it, I should say, believe it or not, or unoriginal tire. I mean, it's a little dry rotted, but it's enough to get you off the road, so I kept it on there. And then Firestone, of course, is one of the very last tire manufacturers to make 16.5 tires, but I didn't care. They quit making that tire. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But as you can see, it needs little things. You know, it needs, you know, it definitely needs a new bed. I mean, this thing's been caked up with Bondo so much. I just kind of want to have a new bed and start from scratch. You can also order every panel for this bed and put it together. They go together a lot like Legos. It's all nuts and bolts. There's not really any welds to deal with, except for back here at the very back where the tailgate's at. There's a couple of spot welds back there, but everything else, pretty much, it's all bolt together. And, they had wood beds in these. It was an option. As you can see, I had the steel bed. I thought about doing a wood bed, but I'm kind of keeping myself entertained on that, and we'll see what happens. One of the other things I had to do was put these trailing arms in. Had my pop help me, of course. The original ones were on their way out. They rotted out so easily on these trucks. And I was backing my race car up into the driveway, and I heard a pop, and I'm like, what was that? And it ended up being a welded in brace on one of the on the old one, and it actually, the weld popped off and it ended up falling down. I'm like, ooh, because this was bending because it was so rotted out, the old one was. So I ended up on that. I was like, on that note, it's time to replace these, like, now. So it's got a 410 rear end, but I eventually want to I want to go down on the gear a little bit. I want to bring it to either 373, or actually, honestly, I probably plan on a 342 because of the non-overdrive transmission. And with it being a big block, I don't think it's going to care with all the torque that it's going to make. So this thing's got a 410 gear in it, luckily for the 350, because that 350 definitely needs it, but that 402 I plan on putting this thing is definitely not going to need it. All right, let's go for a drive. Another thing I've been a little lazy about is straightening the steering wheel out. I did alignment on it last summer, as a matter of fact. Didn't really get a chance to straighten the steering wheel out. I should. It really is a beautiful truck to drive. I mean, it rides really nice, believe it or not, being a 3/4 ton. The coil spring rear suspension really helps that. A lot of people praised it back in the day, coil spring rear suspension.
again, this thing don't, the engine that's in this truck don't really make a whole lot of power, so don't expect to go anywhere quick. This truck's really nice because it really suppresses the ego in a way, because you know everybody nowadays wants to, you know, make great time, but this truck kind of makes you want to, you know, have a good time, not make great time. It's just, you know, once again, it's no hot rod. And even with the 402 in it, I think it's going to be closer to the same way. This truck does have a creeper gear, of course, but the only time I really use it is when I'm getting the trailer going, or creeping really slowly in my backyard after it rains so I don't tear up the grass. Living out here in the country now, I seem to fit in quite well too. A lot of people around here, they really turn their heads to this truck. You know, may or may not, you know, make them think of, you know, their grandfather, or you know, their dad, or their uncle, or some relative in the family. Chances are they had a truck like this. And a lot of times out here, there's even, you know, there's even more than just something like this. There's usually a steak truck or a grain truck, or held a pesticides container or something like that. These trucks were regularly known out here, and the Fords and the Dodges were too. I mean, these trucks back in the day, in this time period, but they weren't creature comfort luxury vehicles or a family sedan. They were, you know, they were dedicated to work and utilities. Another thing I do want to do is, when I tear apart this motor, or when I tear this motor out of here and I put the 402 in it, I'm also planning on going through the transmission too. It's got a SM465 transmission in it, which is stock. This came factory, as you see here. I drive really careful because I don't really have a decent camera mount like I thought I did. Shifter without the clutch. Oh, this shifter is really sloppy. That's another thing I gotta fix. I want to suck the shifter up. When I had my Fall Guy truck, that was the crispest shifter I have ever had. I mean, that shifter was more crisp than the shifter in my S10, or even in my race car. I mean, even my race cars weren't as good as that. I think you could find every gear, the grain of gear, it didn't matter. It didn't, you know, it didn't grind or anything. Now this here, it's more or less like stirring a bowl. I mean, I think my F100 with that 3 on the tree was a little less of a bowl to stir. But it's just old 50-year-old trucks going to do 50-year-old truck things. This time of year, it's really nice to drive this. You know, you get the cornfields, look out in the country here, and you feel right at home. The lack of air conditioning, you get the vent windows to make up for it in this. It does get hot in here, depending on what time of the year it is, what time of the summer it is. It's July in here, and you're towing the race car, and that engine's laboring like crazy, and it gets to be pretty hot in here. But I've come home with victories and racing and stuff like that. And, you know, I just drive this thing like nothing else. For those of you that don't know, I ended up buying a house out here, and I grew up in Metro Detroit, Dearborn. I just ended up buying a house out here in the country. Kind of rented with mom and dad for quite some time after I came back from North Carolina. I went away to school there for a couple of years and came back. And kind of rented with them, get on my feet, have a little play money in the meantime to enjoy stuff like this. But now that I got a house, you know, it's been I had to kind of cut up my priorities a little bit. Try to make time for everything that I can. This truck though, it served well. I mean, this whole summer and in the spring, and pretty much since I bought the house last January, I ended up I've been using this truck to haul trash out of the basement that they left behind, that the previous owners had left behind, to the dump. And I filled this bed right up. You know, I mean, a lot of people don't really use long bed pickups anymore, and I honestly can't understand how. I mean, you get a family, kids and wife and stuff like that, and the 4-door is a little more practical at that point. But you know, I see a lot of guys, when they go to use the bed, they got to put the tailgate down. They even put, you know, a dirt bike back there. And personally, you know, that's why I choose my lawn beds, because, you know, a lot more utilitarian. But this bed, and not making it up, I use this bed to its full extent. I've used every square inch of this bed almost regularly. I've had a bunch of racing stuff back there. When I had my open race car trailer, I actually had my all my stuff in the bed because I didn't have an enclosed to put all the rain tires and all that stuff in. So I had to put all the toolboxes and everything. I had to put that all in the bed of the truck. And at the end of the day, between that and my clothes and stuff, a couple bags, it all ended up taking up the entire space of that bed. It's funny nowadays because, you know, you get these generations of kids and stuff, and I may sound like a boomer when I say this, but you know, a lot of these kids, you know, they kind of look at these vehicles and they're like, yeah, I don't want something like that. Ew, it's old, you know. I want my, you know, 2023, you know, Silverado High Country, you know, with the Bluetooth and the you know, trailer towing assist and the, you know, the blinking lights in the mirrors and stuff like that. In reality, you give one of those kids a truck like this, and you know, teach them how to drive it, or let them teach themselves how to drive it, better yet, they'll honestly become better drivers. From my take on it, because you know, when you teach a kid to drive a stick shift, or you know, be aware of his surroundings by not depending on backup cameras and you know, lane warning systems and lane change and automatic braking and stuff like that, put in these new vehicles nowadays, you're teaching them to be a better driver. You know, and that's always been kind of a little gripe I've had is lately is these cars they have nowadays, they cater to people who, you know, need to learn how to drive. But, you know, to each their own. But, you know, at the same time, my insurance thanks you for knowing how to drive. Another thing that's cool about getting kids, you know, the younger generations into these is, you know, it gets them away from, you know, the whole video games and all that stuff, and, you know, doing drugs and things like that. And, you know, it gives these kids something to, you know, look forward to. You know, it sets kind of goals for them, you know, in terms of enjoying something, having a passion for something. I mean, I started fixing up old pickup trucks after I got, you know, a year after I went through a nasty breakup, you know, with an ex-girlfriend. And then it turned into this, you know, what it is today, which I really do enjoy. I enjoy taking, you know, classic vehicles, specifically pickups, because it's pretty much all I've dealt with. They're a lot easier to fix up and restore, and there's a lot more parts, aftermarket out there for them. But taking something that's, you know, not great and making it great again, and making it better and putting it back on the road and giving it a new life, I mean, it's a good feeling to me. And aside from the racing, this is, you know, pretty much a whole nother, you know, passion I kind of took on. My wallet don't like me for it, but I mean, I like me for it. At the end of the day, you got to do what makes you happy. Another thing about this truck, and it's very sentimental to me, is my grandfather actually had one of these. His was either a 71 or 72. I think it was a 72. It was a C10. It wasn't a 20. My dad told me about it. He had a camper in the back of it. He showed me a couple pictures of it. My grandfather had it. It was a V8 and a 3 on the tree. I thought it was a 4 on the floor for the longest time, but my dad ended up telling me no, it was the 4 on the floor. My grandfather had a 66 tow truck record that had a 4 on the floor in it, of course. But that C10 apparently had a 3 on the tree. But it was a V8 truck, so that's kind of cool that it had a V8 in it. Because usually 90% of the time you find a truck now that has a 6-cylinder in it with a 3 on the tree. And it's really rare to find a 3/4 ton with a 3 on the tree. But they are out there. And it's even more rare to find a 4-wheel drive with a 3 on the tree. Once again, they are out there. That was another nice thing about back then, is you had a lot more variety of options to get for these trucks. And yeah, while you didn't have all the options of, you know, the big screens and the technology that we have today, for example, you could order a Cheyenne trim with these, but you could get it with a 250 straight 6 and a 3 on the tree. Or you could get a base model, bare bones work truck with no air, and the basic gauges, and just a base, and not even a radio. But you could get it with a 402 and an automatic. Nowadays, we got these packages you order for these vehicles, and it's just not the same. They kind of force you to you have to get this to have that. And it ultimately, it usually makes the vehicle cost more and stuff like that. And it's not something I'm a fan of. That's part of why, it's part of the inspiration on why I want to build this truck like I would have ordered it had I been around back then to buy this truck brand new. Because I would have ordered it with 402, but I would have ordered it with 4-speed. And I would have ordered, the gauges, but I probably would have ordered something different, oil pressure, temperature, and stuff like that, specifically on the gauges. But you got lights and stuff still, but the little creature comforts went a long way back then like that. Probably wouldn't have ordered it with AC because I grew up without air conditioning, so air conditioning is kind of an extra for me. I'm towing my race car with this. I'm usually towing it. I try to find back roads so that I'm kind of not in the way on the freeway so much. Like I said, this thing can only do probably about 55 or 60 tops. Towing my race car. The nice thing about this truck is when you're turning, and I gotta hold this signal stock because the steering wheel's in the wrong position. Is that you can shift, you almost don't even have to shift out of 4th gear, and sometimes I don't, depending on how sharp the corner is, because this thing's geared so short that it doesn't really care, even being as tired as the motor is. But back to what I was talking about with my race car towing it, I usually try to find roads like this to tow with. But when I get the big block put in it, I put the big block in it, I put it together, I'll probably change my mind. Especially if it's got a different highway gear in the back, and I'm able to pull. Because it's not so much the motor not making power as it is the motor screaming at 3,500, 4,000 RPM all the time. And big blocks don't like to scream like that. They like the low end. At least in these in a truck application, they like to stay on the low end. They don't really like to rev very high. So I want to kind of keep it that way. But overall, I'm very happy with this truck. I mean, it's a great truck. It let it turn a lot of heads. And at the same time, you still use it. And I don't plan on making this truck perfect whatsoever. I mean, Now, it doesn't, in my eyes, and it's always been like this, to me, it doesn't have to be perfect to be nice. I just want it to be nice. So, in due time, I plan on doing more to this thing. Eventually, I actually want to take the mirrors off and actually put proper tripod style tilt mirrors on it and stick out a little farther. But these mirrors, while they look good on it, they don't exactly, they're not very useful. They kind of shake around. But like I said, in due time, I just wanted to get rid of the obnoxious mirrors that were on it. But anyways, back home we go. Hacienda. I'm going to continue to use this truck for work, of course, especially around here now. I do plan on going racing here in about a month, a little over a month, and I plan on actually getting going to Gingerman with the Porsche for the Fall Festival of Speed. That'll probably be my next video. Anyways, we're home. That's a video on my truck. I know it's been long overdue. So thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Later.